Hello, hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good, very good.
Okay, I see everything is set up. We are recording, which is amazing.
Absolutely. And shout out to Galaxia_MK for the reminder, as always.
Wouldn't start without it. So, let's wait for a couple of minutes because we do have quite a lot of interesting things to talk about today. We're going to talk about the 5 things that I think everyone should know about privacy coins, not just about BIM, but about the entire privacy coin space in general. And this is what we will start with, so that people who join in the very beginning will, get their money's worth of information. And then we will move to questions, which we have quite a few today. And, if there will be some time left, we will talk about other interesting things, even though there was not too many, I think, developments this week. But, there is always something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's wait for another minute and then we will go. I have my cup of coffee here, so I'm completely set.
Ready to yarn. I have a small dog bringing me a bone that he's just got from the butcher, and he's chosen my feet as the perfect place to eat it on.
It is the perfect place.
Yeah, no doubt.
I think in his mind he's sharing it with you in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh man, no, like small animals in general are cute, and small dogs, puppies are absolutely amazing.
He's pretty funny, although he's like doubled in size now. He's almost 10 kilos.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how large will he be when he grows up?
I don't think he will be very big. He will be like slightly smaller than a Labrador when he's fully grown, I believe.
Many years ago, relatives of mine, they got a golden retriever, and initially it was tiny, and it was like you could hold it in one hand, and then after some time, it would occupy a whole 3-seat sofa.
Oh wow!
Yeah, without leaving place for anyone else to sit there. So he had his own sofa where he was living. Yeah, so
that
escalated quickly.
Yeah, when I was young, we had a Great Dane, which was very, very large dog and a small horse.
Yeah, it's huge. Cool. So let's get started because we do have a lot of things to talk about and no time to waste. So the idea of talking about privacy coins in general came to me because I was reading a lot of tweets and articles and things that were talking about very recently, all of those Binance listings and delistings and relistings and things that, somehow kind of keep happening, this saga doesn't end, right? So at first they delisted a bunch of coins, and then they said, no, not all of those coins are actually private. So they relisted some of them back. And then one of the coins that wasn't relisted said, oh, we're giving up the privacy features. I think it was Horizon. Yeah, Horizon.
Okay, yeah.
So Horizon said they're going to fork out the anonymity pools, I don't know if they will be listed or not. But this entire kind of discussion of what isn't privacy coin, and also in order to just kind of understand this landscape of what's going on in this industry. So that's why I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of talk about it. So let's start with point number 1 out of 5, and it's basically what are we talking about when we talk about privacy? Because privacy is a very broadly used word, and a lot of people mean different things when they say private. And in many people's mind, privacy is somehow associated with something bad or criminal or negative. And people that say, I don't need privacy because I have nothing to hide, which is an argument you probably heard a lot.
Yeah.
So obviously, it makes as much sense as saying I don't need freedom of speech because I have nothing to say right now. But what I want to emphasize is that when we talk about privacy, especially in the financial sense, it's something that you actually have today. You had it long before Bitcoin. You use it every day, and you expect certain things when you perform your financial transactions, whether it's with your bank or your trading account or your broker or your whatever is happening. You understand or kind of expect which of this information will be seen and by whom. And this is exactly the definition of what I call confidentiality or privacy in this sense. It's like basically your awareness, knowledge, and control over which information is out there and who can see it and who can use it and in what way, right? So that's kind of the idea. So it's not about doing bad things that nobody knows about. No, it's about doing the same regular things that you used to do. For example, you don't expect your coworker, like somebody who works next to you, be able to call up your bank and ask, what's your salary, right? And then go and ask for a raise or whatever, if he somehow discovers that your salary is bigger than his for some reason, right? So you know that's not possible, right? So yes, you understand that if you don't pay your taxes on time or something happens, then yes, maybe the government can subpoena the bank, like provide a legal requirement from the bank to review some information about you. But you also know that no one can just walk into a bank from a street and say, oh, hey, that guy standing over there, like how much money he has, right?
Yeah. And this privacy that banks, or like the privacy that banks provide in this sense, I think like Satoshi Nakamoto like spoke about this. I don't know if it was in the white paper or in like the Bitcoin Talk forum or where it was, but I definitely remember reading about him like speaking on the privacy that banks offer.
Yes, and that's exactly the point, that one of the key goals and kind of values of Bitcoin is, first of all, like self-sovereignty, right? You control your keys, your funds. You are in control of what's happening with your money. You are the holder and you are the bank for yourself, actually, which has a lot of interesting points that we will touch, like how difficult it is to properly control your keys and what you should do to make them safe and all that. But it obviously was not, in my opinion, an idea of creating this utopian society where all financial information in the world is completely public. And case in point that there are pseudonymous addresses on Bitcoin today, like from the very beginning, even though it was believed that having those pseudonymous addresses would be, let's say, sufficient to provide some anonymity, very quickly we have discovered, especially with the addition of centralized exchanges, where you provide your KYC, and even without them, the fact is that this information is very easily traceable across the blockchain, that first of all stores all of the information that ever gets to the blockchain stored in perpetuity. And in case of Bitcoin, all of this information is completely open. It's in completely plain text. So yes, initially the address owner is not known, but after a few transactions that you make and you collect this information over time, and the fact that this information is stored from the very beginning, it means that it doesn't matter at which point in time you discover the identity of a specific wallet, you can now add this to the information you have already gathered and start untangling this transaction graph and understanding who sent what to whom. And since this information is stored like forever in the blockchain, eventually all of the participants or most of the participants will be found. Now, it doesn't really help that you can create infinite amount of new addresses, because when you create a new address, you need to get some funds into this address. And unless you're a miner, then you need some kind of transaction that will take UTXO from one existing address and then put it in your new address. And this creates the new link. So all new addresses eventually become linked to the existing transaction graph. And that's how companies like Chainalysis or any kid with a laptop and basic knowledge of Python can analyze those transactions and understand the flow of funds, what was kind of sent to whom and where, and all this information in the open. So one of the important kind of things to understand, that it's not just about knowing like in general, oh, that guy is a whale, or this guy, he holds infinite amount of Pepe, right? The point is that this kind of information is very actionable, especially when you advance to DeFi, where you are doing on-chain trading, like we have on Ethereum happening every day. And it can lead to prompt running. It can lead to anyone being able to analyze your trades and kind of either copy them and then ruin your, strategy, or taking the same positions, or on the opposite side, taking positions specifically against you. Because this transparency in many cases doesn't only affect you, it affects the entire market in a sense, and it completely changes the game. And that's not something that I think was implied. Like when you're doing DeFi trading, we see this every day with examples of MEV, right? So anyone can see what's happening with the transaction and who's sending it, and then they can extract more value from it, not necessarily to your benefit, usually against you, and that's also a problem. Many serious organizations that are trading in the real kind of old school financial world would have a lot of difficulties operating in a world where their competitors can see everything they're doing absolutely immediately, front running them, doing like anything they want, bribing validators, whatever. All of that is because this information is available to anyone. And yes, maybe like there is some utopian world or theoretical model where this could work, but I don't think that's where we are going, and I don't think that's where we want to go in this future where we adopt cryptocurrencies more and more, right?
Absolutely. And the more like DeFi applications that come about, the worse it gets, like with perpetual swaps or with like borrowing and lending and this kind of stuff. It adds even more like problems and issues and complications that can come with a lack of privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to mention the fact that, in addition to the obvious things like, privacy is the basic human right, you do want privacy in your life, regardless of whether you have something to hide or not. But one of the problems that people who say, okay, I understand, I need privacy, now that they encounter this issue, they go to the, CoinMarketCap, let's say, and they look for privacy coins, and they see quite a few, right? Like they see 20 different projects, all of them claiming that they're privacy coins. Like, are they all the same? Are they all different? What are the differences? It's very, very difficult to understand because usually the differences are on deep technical level. And it's completely impossible for someone who is not, deeply technical and involved in this specific space to understand exactly what the nuances are. And I think my favorite example is that some time ago, I found this YouTube channel. It's called Lock-Picking Lawyer. Have you heard about it?
Lock-Picking Lawyer?
Yeah.
I haven't, no.
So it's a guy, he's a lawyer, and his hobby is picking locks. He's an expert lock picker, and he takes any lock, like a new lock that goes in. It can be a padlock, it can be like a door lock, it can be gun safe that people use to store their guns or whatever. And he analyzes them, he finds some flaws in them usually, and he shows how these locks or safe boxes can be picked and opened. And what you see there, first of all, it's absolutely amazing to watch, but it actually requires a very large amount of expertise when you buy a lock to make sure that this lock will actually do what you think it should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you buy a lock, at least me personally, I buy a lock and I think, okay, it will lock what it's going to lock, but not really. If anyone wants to open it and has the know-how, they probably can.
Exactly. So the reason is that you, as a customer, consumer, you cannot understand, you don't know which techniques can be used, how these locks are opened in general, right? So you don't become a lock picking expert to buy a lock. And that's why you say, oh, it looks heavy, it looks, sturdy, it looks good. I see that, the width or of this bar is good enough. And then you see that it can be actually opened like with, a toothpick and some change. So yeah, it's actually important. But once again, like, what are we doing, right? What can we do? We're not going to become experts, all of us. And our goal is to get to the situation where the standard or like this kind of social consensus around these things is protecting us enough so that we don't have to think about it. We can just pick, basically we take any lock on the market, should be, or like at least it should be rated in some way, but it should be good enough to protect us to this level of expectation. And this matching of levels of expectation, that's what actually plays here. Because when you take your motorcycle, right, and you leave it on the street and you connect it with some lock, you should be expecting reasonably that in the morning when you come back to it, it will still be there, right? So that's, if it's not, then the lock was probably inadequate.
Yeah.
And it does happen in many, many different areas. For example, every modern car that you buy today is safe enough. It was tested, it was certified, and it's safe. Like, obviously some cars are more or less safe, but any car, it went through, crash testing, and it has all of the equipment that protects you in case of a crash. Like, everything is there. You don't really need to become an expert in car, safety to buy a car. The same happens with, for example, modern browsers, all of them, and modern websites, they all use HTTPS. HTTPS is an encrypted protocol that encrypts the traffic between your browser and the server, so that nobody can interject in the middle and, basically change or somehow trick you into doing one thing and actually doing the other thing behind your back. So this HTTPS technology was not always there by default. Today, all, websites that store either personal information or obviously financial information, they all use HTTPS. And if you look at the left, side of your address bar, you will see this small lock appearing there. And if you click on it, you will see a lot of information that you don't understand. But the very fact that this lock is there, even if you are not technical enough to understand this information, it still kind of protects you, because by default, all the serious browsers downloaded from official sources, they do that for you. And this is our goal. Our goal is not to create like this. After all, none of us wants to live without a huge safe that you need like to turn two keys simultaneously to open, right? That's not the purpose here.
Yeah.
But we do want, in our new financial world, which is using cryptocurrencies, which is more decentralized, which is cheaper in terms of fees, which has a lot of interesting DeFi opportunities, we do want this world to be as private as we need it to be for us. And we don't want to really become experts in everything. Eventually, that's at least, I hope that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like not possible to become an expert in everything. It's like you cannot be an expert lock picker and
exactly
expert in privacy coins and expert in cars and this kind of stuff is pretty infeasible.
Exactly. So having said that, let's move to the point number 2, and let's look at what do we have today. Like, what kind of technologies do we have today when we talk about privacy coins? And I will focus on 5 key, or not key, but 5 kind of mechanisms how the privacy works today in cryptocurrencies. There are others. I'm not saying those are the only ones, but I will talk about these because the first two of them are the most popular ones, and the 3 others are related and also related to Beam. After all, we're from Beam here. Yeah. So first, let's talk about Monero. Monero is the most, I think, commonly known privacy coin. Very old and very safe and very secure. And Monero uses a combination of several technologies in order to provide privacy. So the first technology is called the ring signature. The ring signature is exactly as it sounds. each transaction has several signatures, out of which only one is real and the others are decoys, right? I'm not going into any technical details. I'm just explaining the mechanism. And then basically what happens is that when you send a transaction, the value is encrypted and the signature is, the real signature is not known. So when you, as an external observer, you look at the transaction and say, okay, one of those 11 at this point, because Monero currently uses maybe 15 already, they're upgrading this number every once in a while. But let's say one of these 11 people is actually the one who sent the transaction. The others are decoys. I don't know which one, so it could be either one of them, and I don't know the value, right? So that's how the anonymity is achieved. And then the transaction is sent, and another transaction is sent, and that's how this privacy is created on Monero. Yeah. Now, one of the important things to emphasize about Monero, and we will talk a lot about this point, is that in Monero, all of the transactions are confidential by default. So there is no option to say, no, I want to send a transaction and expose its data to anyone. That's not an option. And it's very important that we will talk about it in a minute. So all of these Monero forks, clones, and other projects that use this combination of ring signature, like if you see ring signature and inscription, confidential transactions, and shielded addresses, usually these projects either directly fork Monero or they re-implement some of the similar ideas, but in any way they can add additional features, obviously, and emphasize different sides, but that's the mechanism, the general mechanism that guides all of these projects. The second mechanism is ZKsnarks, and this is what Zcash uses. So ZK is a very popular topic these days, and it talks about zero knowledge. It used to be a very niche mathematical area, but the point is very simple. You can prove something without revealing the data that you used to prove it. For example, I can prove that I have, one Bitcoin, or at least one Bitcoin, let's say, without showing you which Bitcoin I have, like where I have it, or something like that. That's called zero knowledge proof, because I prove something without revealing anything about the actual data.
Yeah. One of the examples of this that I always find useful for myself anyway is if you need ID, for example, to buy beer or wine, you can prove your age, but you don't have to show the people your driver's license or passport.
Exactly.
Information.
Yes. So the zero knowledge proof would look like something that you could show. Everybody would be, confident that you are of legal age, but they will know nothing else about you, not your real age, not what's your name, what's your social, no other information except for this proof that they can be sure is valid. So Zcash took this concept and they have constructed this system that allows you to say the following. Listen, you see all of these UTXOs on the blockchain? I spend one of them. It's mine. I can prove it. And I spend it. So basically, I send it to somebody else. But I don't reveal which UTXO it was or where I send it. So there is a change in the blockchain. One UTXO was owned by one person. Now it's owned by another person. And all you see as an external observer is the proof that this transaction is actually valid. So the UTXO was not previously spent. It actually exists. It actually holds the value that it's supposed to. And now it belongs to this new person, but no additional information is revealed. And what they did in order to construct these proofs, they used this technology that's called ZKsnarks. And once again, I'm not going into technical details for two reasons. First, I don't understand it myself. And second, completely. And second, that's not the point. The point is that in theory, any of the UTXOs that exist on the blockchain forever and ever, you can say it's one of those, how many there are, doesn't matter, million, it's okay. It's one of those million UTXOs. And the reason you can do that is because this specific ZKsnark technology, it's very interesting in that the size of the proof does not depend on the size of the set from which you select the UTXOs, right? So all of the proofs will be the same size, and it means that it may take longer to construct them, but the verification time, which is what is important when you send the transaction to all the nodes, is the same. So this is what ZKsnark technology is giving us, right? So it's this constant size of the proof, and it's very important.
Okay, nice. And a quick question, just to check that I understand right. So if Monero, for example, wanted to do rather than 11 or 15, like hiding within that amount of signatures, would it kind of scale would it scale linearly? So like if you used 100 or 1,000, it would be very, very big and bulky and like take a lot of time and resource to prove.
I don't know the answer. No, like I don't know. We can Google it up later, but I believe that there are always trade-offs.
Yeah.
And the trade-offs, for example, specifically in Zcash or Snarks case, there are two trade-offs. The first trade-off is that this specific construction requires trusted setup. It could be a huge problem or not, depending on how this trusted setup is implemented, but it does require trusted setup, which means that there is some ceremony that a lot of participants create this one single secret that is not known to each and every one of them, but it's like constructed together. And then they burn and destroy all of the original secrets that they used to create this one secret. But what if suddenly, or it happens, and the chances are really, really infinitesimally small, but if somebody would know that original secret, it would break the entire system. So that's what trusted setup means, right? And like, I'm not saying there is any problem with that. I'm just saying that this is one of the trade-offs. The other one of the trade-off is that these calculations need to be heavily optimized in order to become more efficient. And once they're optimized, they're very difficult to test and debug, and they become very opaque and difficult to end, right? It's very what's called moon math, right? It's very, very high level of mathematics, heavily optimized, difficult to handle, and this is the trade-off. So once again, and you say, okay, so this is actually not bad, right? You take a infinite amount of UTXOs and you prove that one of them was spent. It looks very good. The problem specifically with Zcash is that only a small amount of transactions are actually using this technique. The other ones are completely open, just like on Bitcoin.
And we spoke about this last week, where someone was saying that they didn't realize this and were sending transactions assuming they were private because they were using a privacy coin, but by default they're not private.
Exactly. And it's very confusing because when you go to a project that says, it's a privacy coin, and you send the transaction, say, oh no, actually you should have, turned on this flag. And then, so this is the point that I said, like about Monero being confidential by default. It makes a huge difference because it reduces the amount of actually shielded transactions. And once in a moment, we will talk about what anonymity set means. It makes them easier to trace. It weakens the entire system. By the way, if you're familiar with ARR, the pirate chain, they have basically forked Zcash and they have set all of the transactions to be private by default. So in this regard, it's much better solution, but they have other issues to handle. But in general, when you have privacy blockchain that is not all private by default, I think it's a huge red flag that you should be kind of holding in your mind when you evaluate which privacy coin to use.
Absolutely, and it also affects the non-private transactions, if I understand right, affect the private transactions themselves.
Yeah, your total anonymity is only limited to those that are private, and then if you're doing a lot of transactions which are from private to non-private and vice versa, then you basically reveal some of the value. So yeah, it's all bad.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third mechanism is Lelantus. Now, Lelantus is used by Firo, and it also used, as we will mention in a second, by Beam. So Lelantus also uses zero-knowledge proofs in the same way. The difference is that it doesn't use snarks, which is the technology that allows you to always keep the size of the proof constant. It uses a different math. And in the math that Lelantus uses, the larger is the set that you want to prove, that UTXO is 1 of, X, then the size of the proof also grows. And you cannot actually effectively use it on very, very large amounts of UTXO. So you have to limit it's called the window size. You have to limit your window size. And specifically in Beam implementation of Lelantus, it's limited to 64,000, right? 64,000 UTXOs, you can prove that it's one of those. Now, the benefit of Lelantus is that it does not require a trusted setup, and it's much easier to debug and handle and verify. And this is like the mechanism that Firo uses. And very important to mention that in Firo, also all of the transactions are confidential by default, right?
Yeah.
So the fourth mechanism is MimbleWimble. MimbleWimble is very interesting, kind of different from many other ideas. And MimbleWimble uses this concept of taking the UTXO and constructing the UTXO itself in a way that the whole UTXO becomes one big encrypted proof in a way. And it proves two things. First of all, it encrypts the value of the UTXO, so we don't know what amount was sent. And also, it completely removes the necessity for any addresses, because one of those factors inside this proof is actually the key that you need to reveal or to use in order to prove that it's your UTXO. So MimbleWimble in this regard has this benefit of creating very compact blockchains, because you don't need to store all of the information to verify that the blockchain is valid. You only need to store part of it. But the kind of problem that you have with MimbleWimble is that it can be like if you're using active attacks, if you're sending like specific transactions and then you're trying to follow what happens with those UTXOs, the transaction graph could be traced, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the last kind of system, which is the one that Beam uses currently, is the combination of Lelantus and MimbleWimble. They use very, very similar math, so we managed to kind of combine them together. And the idea is that we use MimbleWimble for regular online transactions, and then we use Lelantus for what we call offline transactions. So you can use either MimbleWimble or Lelantus, but together there is this additional benefit of every Lelantus transaction breaking the transaction graph. So Lelantus basically acts like this river that you cross to, throw the dogs off your scent.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So the more transactions you have, like in Lelantus, like each and every one of them breaks the transaction graph at some point, and together this adds like privacy, doesn't allow tracing. And of course, if you are, only interested in untraceable transactions, because MimbleWimble has other benefits, such as smart contracts and other things. But if all your idea is you want to send value from point A to point B, you just use Lelantus and that's it, right? So basically, it kind of defaults to what Firo is doing.
Okay.
So some people ask me if Lelantus is better in this regard, why don't just use Lelantus? And the answer is that because in MimbleWimble, we use additional properties which allow us to use smart contracts and atomic swaps and do all of these new kind of interesting magical things which are not possible with just Lelantus. So we decided to create this hybrid Lelantus MimbleWimble approach and use it, and not just use Lelantus, because we didn't want to give up all of these interesting features that we did on top of MimbleWimble, right? So it's kind of combination, and the user has the complete freedom to choose what exactly they need to do at each point, and like all of the options are available. So it's not limiting you from doing anything.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
And like as you mentioned before, each comes with like pros and cons and trade-offs.
Oh, definitely. Well. Definitely, there are a lot of, like, first of all, for example, Beam creates 1 block per minute, right? So it means that we are limited in how much time we can afford to spend validating proofs for each block. So this limits the amount of transaction. It influences the set of the size of the window that we're using. So all of these things were carefully chosen. And yes, there are a trade-off. You can say, let's create a transaction, a block like once in 2 minutes, and then you can fit in larger proofs. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting parameters to play with, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason I kind of mentioned all of that is because when you're looking at, and even if you're not an expert, when you're looking at a project and you're trying to evaluate like how they work, look for these technologies and their names. And this will kind of give you the first reference, and maybe there are like nuances, but it will kind of put the project into one of these several categories. Like if you see that something is a fork of Zcash or like using ZKsnarks, you can more or less understand what kind of technology they're using and what are the trade-offs, and always look for privacy by default. So if you see that the project does not have all of the transactions private by default, you should be very careful and understand exactly what you're doing, because, as I said, it severely weakens the entire system. Okay, so this brings us to point number 3 out of 5, and it is big guy's privacy and little guy's privacy. That's how I call it. And what I mean by that is, okay, so I cannot walk into a bank and ask how much money that guy has. But if I'm an FBI agent and I have a subpoena and I have I don't know what, then I can do it, right? So as a little guy, there are a lot of information that I cannot get access to. But if I'm the big guy, the government, I don't know, institutions, whatever like they are, they can get a lot more information than me, right? So the reason I mentioned that is because of the very important difference between privacy that's on layer 1 and privacy that's on layer 2. So Monero is a great example of little guy's privacy. On Monero, nobody knows you're a dog. Anyone, you could be the president of the world or the last, I don't know who. You send a transaction, exactly the same rules apply, exactly the same privacy levels apply to anyone. And, there's no differentiation between who you are or what you're doing, right? Same goes for Beam. Beam also provides and Firo, right? Everything that has privacy by default on layer 1 is like having these properties. However, recently we saw a lot of projects that are doing layer 2, so-called ZK rollups. And ZK rollups, what they're doing is basically combining a lot of transactions together and replacing them with a zero-knowledge proof. So once these transactions, all of them, are replaced with a zero-knowledge proof, it is private because you don't know, like looking at the proof, you just know the end results. You don't know what information went into those transactions. However, those that are combining the transactions, they know. And usually these are centralized and kind of well-known organizations. So this is also privacy, layer 2 privacy. And indeed, many of those projects provide privacy in this list of features that they, have. But it's important to understand that even though, yes, it is eventually private for the little guy, it's not necessarily private for the big guy. Just like, I cannot see your, Twitter credentials or your Facebook feed or whatever you're using, but the government can, in different ways, legal or not, get this information directly from the servers of the company. So the same logic applies for these layer 2 solutions, that like you need to be careful and understand who controls it actually, how decentralized it is, what kind of information can be obtained if somebody actually says, yeah, you have to store all of the transactions forever, before they are merged into ZK proof.
And like we talked on at the beginning, this is very difficult to kind of like take all the information in from the different like blockchains or L1s or L2s and discern what is private and what is kind of
so you can just assume, like, I mean, for many people this is good enough, right? I mean, if my competitors cannot see it, that's good enough for me. I don't care if government sees it as long as my competitors don't. So you need to just keep in mind that this is the situation, and you can decide. I mean, that's how you evaluate the tools that you are using for privacy. You just need to understand and have the same expectations as the reality, or the closer to reality that your expectations are, the healthier you will be.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next fourth point is actually regarding the anonymity set, that I kind of hinted and talked about it a little. So what is the anonymity set, and why is it important, and how do you know what it is for you, and like what's happening? So the anonymity set is this parameter that kind of defines how private you are, and I will give you a few examples to illustrate how it works. So let's say, these Find Waldo pictures? Or something, this little guy in the stripe somewhere in the very, very big picture with a lot of different people and animals and cars and whatever.
Yeah.
So the reason it's difficult to find this person is because there are a lot of details on this picture. Right now, imagine that you go to a wall, which is like, 100 meters long and, 5 meters high. It will be much more difficult for you to find this small person there, right? You will have to go through a lot of different, parts of it and look for it and whatever. So this is basically the idea of the anonymity set. It's like, in what set of other UTXOs, transactions, people you hide. Now, let's say you want to hide in a group of people. And you say, okay, I can hide within a group of 100 people or 1,000 people. Like, obviously 1,000 is better because it's much more difficult to find me out of 1,000 people, right? And this is what is called the anonymity set, the size of the anonymity set. It can be 1,000, can be 10 million, can be whatever you want. Now, in addition to this, there is a different parameter, which is called effective anonymity set size. And the reason is that if you hide like in a group of 10 people or 100 people, and then in another group where most of those people are the same, right?
Sure.
So it's not necessarily this group is random. You need to be sure that this group is random, right? So for example, you're a very tall guy. It will not really help you to hide in many different groups of people who are shorter than you. You will always stand out, right?
Yeah.
So that's exactly the point of the effective anonymity set. And why is it relevant to what we're talking about? So let's talk about Zcash, for example, in theoretical form. So you send the proof that it's actually one of the existing UTXO that you're spending, right? But the reality is that most people, assume that that's true, right? If most people actually spend their UTXO within 24 hours of when they receive it, for example, if there is an assumption that's valid, so your effective anonymity set is not infinity as it should be theoretically, it's actually 24 hours.
Yeah.
So if if researchers have data or statistics on how people actually use these UTXOs for what they're used and how they're used, they can calculate. They don't need to look into infinity. They can actually calculate, okay, most people will presumably spend them in the next 24 hours. So that's where we're going to be looking. And this makes their research and their attacks much more efficient.
Yep.
The reason for that is that when you are reading about infinite anonymity sets and things like that, like, Zcash always talks about like how it's really infinite and all that, you need to understand that it's theoretical versus practical, and the practical is what's important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw an example of this on Twitter. Like, people were tweeting it out live, and someone said like, Zcash is so private, and the other person said like, if you send a transaction, I'll be able to tell you like where it was from and this kind of thing. And of course they were able to, because the person put it into the pool and then took it straight out. And obviously the only one that it happened in that time stamp.
Exactly.
And so they knew exactly what
Exactly. So there are many factors. One of them is the amount of transactions, because if you are the only person in the room, it's you.
Yeah.
And the amount of transactions, the rate with which you recycle your UTXOs and how you use them, all of these factors can influence directly the anonymity set. So let's talk about Monero, for instance. Monero has two parameters for the anonymity set. The first one is the size of the ring, obviously. the ring signature. So the larger it is, like if it's 15, it's much better than 11, etc. But the second part is the amount of transactions. So if there are a lot of transactions with 15 anonymity set on each transaction, it's good privacy. It's once again, who says what's good, right? Like how difficult is it to trace? But the point is that it is kind of on this theoretical maximum that you can expect, right? Like everything eventually can somehow be traced, but not using not simple, not using like computers that we have today. Like if it works as designed, it is great privacy, right? So the same goes for Lelantus, obviously, right? So Lelantus, as we said, cannot afford to have infinite window, but the size of the actual window that was set is good enough for all practical purposes, because once again, depending on the usage, once you have some assumption of how often the UTXO is used, it provides basically the same practical anonymity set as you would have with theoretically infinite set, right? That's the point.
Yeah.
So the usage of the system is very important, like how often the system is used, how many transactions there are. And once again, attackers are smart. They can create transactions themselves. They can, run nodes. They can do all kinds of interesting things. When you think about chain analysis, it's not like just, people downloading the blockchain data and then analyzing it, like using Python scripts. No, a lot of it is actually actively exploring, attacking, sending transactions, tracing what happens to them. So there is a lot of that going on. So it's very important to understand the complexity of this and kind of think about the anonymity set of where exactly you are. And finally, point number 5, which a lot of people somehow either avoid or don't talk about as much, but no privacy solution will actually help you without OpSec, operational security. And what it means is that if after you receive a Monero transaction, you go to the street and you shout, "I have just received the Monero transaction for $1 million," it will not help you the fact that Monero is great, right? It will do nothing for you.
Yeah.
So in order to actually use this privacy, you need to educate yourself on quite a few like basic things. And I honestly believe it should be part of any school these days, or like, I don't know, maybe 4th or 5th grade when children start touching, devices, maybe even earlier today. But the point is that you need to be careful what runs on your machine, on the same machine that uses, you have your keys or your wallets on, or the phone the same, right? You need to be very careful because in many cases you will be exposed not because somebody will hack Monero or Beam, but because they will just be able to get that directly from your wallet unencrypted or encrypted and then break the password if your password is too shared. And things like that, and we see that happening like all the time, and all of the things that you are doing around your crypto transactions, even if you're using privacy coins, is as important for your privacy eventually as the fact like whether the privacy coin that you're using is has 11 or 15 anonymity set in the ring, right? So that's very important to understand. And if you're serious about your privacy, it all starts from kind of basic hygiene in terms of what you're running, like which extensions you install in your browser, like which software you install and how you verify that it's actually correct. And once again, it does require more technical knowledge than just somebody randomly walking into a computer and, just starting clicking buttons. But believe me, it's worth it. It's really, really worth to invest in a course or online education or whatever you want to just learn about some basics. And, eventually you should either install as little as possible or keep separate machine for everything that's related to crypto, if you can do it. But you should be aware that OpSec and everything around it is exactly as important as the underlying technology of the privacy coins that you're using.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this kind of aspect of it reminds me of like getting hacked and this kind of thing. But a lot of it is like, a lot of these hacks is like social engineering or this kind of thing, rather than like installing a virus on your computer. It's like social engineering. Yeah. And I guess a lot of like the OpSec stuff is also being like cautious about what you're interacting with and what you're doing and this kind of thing beyond what you're trying to keep private. Because I guess when like psychologically you're probably focused on like being careful when you're trying to be private, but then when you're doing something unrelated, you have your guard down, so to speak, and that's when stuff slips and you're giving people more data than you necessarily want to.
Yeah, I mean, we will try to do that without getting to the paranoid level, but it basically becomes part of your routine, just like you lock the car. When you go out the car, you lock it automatically, don't even think about it. You lock the house, right? You close the windows, or like you turn on the alarm, whatever you're doing to make you basically safe. You look left and right, or in your case, right and left when you cross the street. I don't know how I didn't die several times in when I was in London, but never mind. I had a friend, he always saved me at the last moment.
This is like something that is difficult to break. Like nowadays in London, I just look both ways about 4 times because I'm so confused after spending a lot of time in China and then going to Hong Kong every now and then, which is the opposite, and then now in London.
What country? And where you? No, the reason I space is because we have all of those, small, what's they called, the motor scooters that they just go all the way. They don't care about which way the street goes, right?
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. So that kind of sums the 5 points that I wanted to talk about. Each point can be expanded indefinitely, right? So it's impossible to cover everything, but so certainly not in 1 hour. But I think those are the 5 things that everyone should kind of understand about the privacy coins. And I think that if you kind of look it up, it will help you to get more and quicker oriented in when you look at a new project or project that you're not familiar with. Try to understand how the privacy is achieved, what exactly is provided, and adjust your expectations accordingly. I think it's very important. You always should know what to expect, and then never be as disappointed at the person who sent the transaction and thought it was private, right? So you don't want to be that guy.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's like all of this stuff is very fascinating as well. And obviously, if you're listening to the Beam space, you're obviously quite interested in privacy, and this gives like a very good overview and some directions that you can go down to explore more. And one thing that's like always not surprises me, but like gives me a good feeling inside, don't have a word for that, is that it's like ever evolving, and like always new stuff is coming out. Like there's different attacks, or there's different like protections, and there's so much going on in the space and privacy that to me is really great to see.
Yeah, for sure. So I just want to say before we go into the last 5 minutes, we do have a lot of questions, and I don't think we should switch right now and start answering them, because there are quite a few, and I don't want to do it in a quick and inaccurate way. So I will answer all the questions that we have directly, like in Twitter, and there are good questions here. I promise to do it by tomorrow, and I just wanted to say that if you see good, there are a lot of materials, but I don't know how much of those materials is actually entry level. Like I'm talking about like basic security, like understanding crypto. But I saw recent some very good articles about how to store your keys, like what to do to make your seed phrases safe and all that. So it's very important, because without it, you will never be able to achieve the level of self-sovereignty that you probably want to. And this is kind of the flip side of that, right? When it's your responsibility, you should be responsible. You can't just act as if you are in a regular bank when you can just, call and say, oh no, I just lost my credit card and somebody already bought a pair of Nike, something with it. That doesn't work. And so, okay.
Like it.
Yeah, it was good. Like we actually managed to squeeze it all in 1 hour.
Absolutely. And like for me, I mean, obviously I'm speaking here, but a lot of stuff that is new to me and also like refreshing stuff that I've looked at in the past and forgotten. And it's definitely fascinating. And I'm going to personally go try and find some good resources on the OpSec stuff as well, because I think that's where my privacy is probably leaking a lot more than I.
No, I mean, the problem is that how this entire industry is constructed right now, it rather makes you understand less about the project when you look at its, websites.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And it's very difficult to gather information because when you're just looking at, I don't know, top 3 by market cap or something, you miss a lot of details which are important. And it's funny because I think like if you would apply the same logic, let's say to cars, right? And you would just say, oh, let's look at the top 3 car manufacturers in the world. So we have Toyota and we have Ford and we have, Honda. And then you saw Volkswagen. And you say, okay, great. Those are the top 3 that I look at. And then I say, okay, so you will never see a Ferrari or Lamborghini or Jeep or like tons of other cars that you might want. So that's exactly the problem. And that's exactly this kind of bias that all of these articles about top 3 something create. And also because they don't dive deep enough and they just look at the labels basically. So for example, I think the funniest situation was the secret network, which is a very interesting solution for private smart contracts on top of non-confidential layer 1 Cosmos-based blockchain. And like the technology behind the smart contracts is amazing. It uses Intel SGX, which is the secure execution environment. But when you're just sending value transactions, which is what you're doing when you're interacting with an exchange, it's exactly as any Cosmos project, right? So it's basically completely transparent. So when it was initially delisted and obviously relisted, I think it was because of 2 things. First of all, there is a privacy tag in the CoinMarketCap or something. Because it does have some variation of privacy in something, but it's like completely different from, Monero or Beam, right? But also because it's called secret network. I mean, So it's funny, but when you see exchange like Binance, which is the top exchange in the world, making decisions, based on, and imagine the damage, right? The damage like for the project, for the holders, for the investors that is done when you just, delete because, it's privacy, let's delete it. And then, it's not actually privacy, let's release it. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You would expect more like in-depth analysis from people who make those decisions. I think.
Yeah, this would be something that wouldn't surprise me from like US Congress or something like that. But from the leading crypto exchange, I've expected bit.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's been great. I promise to answer the questions. We will see you next week. And be safe, be secure, be private, and go do some reading.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend and see you all next week.
Bye-bye.